Welcome back. Today we're going to take a look at KZ's DQ6. That is KZ's new triple dynamic driver. After a long string of dynamic driver and hybrids, they came out with a triple dynamic driver. And I don't remember if this color is called gray or if this is the black one, but it's definitely a smoked transparent plastic as opposed to the clear, but it is tiny and very nice. It's sort of one of my favorite size versus designs, I guess. Because it has all the classic wing back here, but very tiny, still using QDC as well. And if you are familiar with how big the EDX is, you can see that this guy is, the DQ6 is a sort of an EDX on a diet. It's just a little bit thinner in most dimensions, but I think thickness-wise they're pretty much about the same. So this is the smoked EDX, and this is the smoked DQ6, so it's even more smoked than the EDX. So that's what it looks like up close. So first, thank you to AK Audio Store on AliExpress for sending this out to me. If you look today, it's about $25.84. So quite an affordable set. Triple drivers, something new. A lot of people were talking about it early on, and so very happy that they sent this out and I got a chance to try it out. So first, and probably the most important little bit on this guy is it can really be pushed two different ways. And the way KZ sent this out with the accessories, with these really shallow tips, which I've had really mixed luck with these guys. They've sent them out on, I think, the ASX, the ASF. I think I tried them on the CCAs as well. It's sort of hit or miss. And I know some people use them. I just don't have any luck with them. They always tend to, if there's too much bass, they're kind of fine because they tend to thin out the sound. In this case, they just thin out the sound. So not a ton of luck with these kind of tips. And the same thing with this KZ cable. This is their newish silver pleated cable, and I think it sounds fine on some KZ models like the ZSTX, where it had this aggressive, a little higher end to it, upper mid to it. It played along really well with that. But if for something that's a little thinner to begin with, it ends up just thinning it out even more. So the way I actually ended up using it was KZ star tips, normal star tips, and you can kind of see the difference between the two. So these new DQ6, they're really shallow. It's sort of like having the nozzle deeply inserted into your ear. The star tips, it's got a much deeper little offset. And I actually used a copper cable. This is the nice HCK Litz OCC cable. Again, it just adds a lot more body, a little more bass presence, whereas the KZ cable, this silver cable, tends to be a little brighter, a little leaner. It's just not, I know people love that kind of sound, and I'm kind of more of a bassy sound, so kind of up close, this is what the two look like. This is the KZ stock cable, and this brown one, the copper one, is the Litz OCC. So depending on which accessories you use, you'll end up with something that's either a throwback, KZ throwback, bassy, fun, V-shaped sound, or it's a detailed, lean sound. And it's really odd, and really early on, I sort of noticed people were talking about it in both fashions. And most of it was people who were trying the standard accessories, that it sounded a little bit bright, a little bit thin. And then maybe there'd be a comment like, oh, try copper, try different tips. And you're like, oh, okay, now it makes sense. But it really reminds me of a bassier, fun KZ sound, sort of pre-ZAX, almost to the point maybe pre-ZSX as well. It's just, everything that people liked about KZs back then, that big, bassy, fun sound, it can come through with the right tips in the cable. There's a couple modern twists onto it because it's actually more U-shaped. And let me just kind of quickly run through what this is, the KZ, cartoon graph. But, they do tend to emphasize what they want to emphasize, and this kind of big bass presence, this more U-shaped with not so much recessed mids and a nice upward slope over the upper mids, not too high, not too crazy peaks. So I don't exactly know why they, put a graph like that and then gave accessories which didn't exactly match that type of sound, but that's the way it is. So if you're thinking about the DQ6, just remember that you can really push it to either side. And I definitely went with the more fun, bassy side because that's the sound that I like. But if you're more in line with the CVJ sound or the new CCA, CST, you like something a little leaner, not as bassy, go with these the stock tips and the silver cable, and that should get you closer there. So as I said, I really do like the shape. It's super comfortable. They really packages all the right pieces into a super nice shell and nice metal backplate. Super nice. So yeah, I don't talk about comfort all that much, but these are tiny and comfortable. So on the bass, as I said, KZ star tips, copper cable, lots of bass, and there's slightly more punch than rumble. And if you use the stock cable and the stock tips, you'll notice that it's almost the opposite because there's a leaner, thinner sound to it, and the mid bass kind of gets a little lost, but you're still left with some of that rumble. So change the tips and the cable, and you end up with more. The sub bass kind of stays where it was, but then I think there's more of a mid bass presence. So, the two are pretty close though, but there's just a lot of bass. And compared to the Senfer KP580, it's not that much rumble, but it's some rumble. So it's, a nice punch and some rumble is what I would call it. But drums have this really solid, thick feel to them. And again, star tips do that for me usually. They're just bassy in my ears. So that's kind of that sound that I was getting for it simply because of those tips. Not too much bleed at all. And whether you call it a U or a V-shaped sound, it definitely has this nice division between all that bass and the mids, which tend to be a little leaner and thinner. And so you can't get rid of that as much as I was hoping, but these tips do add a nice bit of warmth into the mids because the stock tips is just too thin for me. It's just not a sound that I prefer, so I definitely went this direction just to keep those mids to have a little warmth to them, a nice kind of a smoother sound to it, not as thin or lean as they are with the stock accessories. So if you're familiar with Harry Styles' Golden, this is in this configuration, it's a very thick version of that. The low end is thick and weighty. The drums and the bass, all of that sort of dominates that track, and I'll call it the thick version. So the mids, there's really a few different things going on. So vocals, especially male vocals, can sound a bit thinner recessed, like I said. Coldplay clocks, Chris Martin's voice definitely falls way back there, and it's just not as forward as it should be. And I wouldn't call that very often. It's one of those, every now and then you're going to run into a track where the vocals are quite back there, but generally not really the case, but it definitely happens. But for me, the Kungs, This Girl, that song with that bassy, fun, relaxed, that's what the DQ6 kind of, it's that throwback KZ sound for me. And with these tips and with that cable, that's what it really sounds like. That song kind of encompasses that sound. And so it's bassy and forward and really big. And I'll get to the soundstage, but you end up with a really wide, big, spacious, fun sound, which is something that I like. That's my throwback KZ guilty pleasure sound. That's exactly what comes through on that song. So again, the upper mids, they can be a little shoutier, thin with the wrong tips, especially these stock tips. That was the part that was driving me more crazy than anything else, was there would be parts of the song that went overly bright or shouty, too thin, and I just didn't like it a whole lot. So that was really the path down this cable, these tips, simply to get around that problem. But the problem with going down this path is that clarity and the transparency isn't as high as you will on the stock accessories. And that clarity and transparency is not a huge deal, but it's noticeable that even with the EDX, I think the EDX had a really nice midsection. It was, a really nice amount of clarity and transparency. You never really had that feeling that it was a V-shaped veiled sound or recessed as much. And I think with these tips and that cable, I think you just emphasized things are pushed back a little more. So that was my trade-off of, I'd rather have a fun, bassier sound, but the expense of that was a little bit of clarity and transparency, which you'll get back with the stock accessories. So the treble, I think, is fine. It actually sounds probably better than most hybrids that KZ puts out in this price range. It's still DD, it's still a dynamic driver treble. It's not a BA, so you don't have that KZ metallic, splashy cymbals, but they have a nice body especially in Fleetwood Mac Dreams, that first cymbal. That was one that bothered me on the Senfer KP580. It just had a brightness to it, and it was missing a lower bit to it, and then the DQ6 kind of nails that specific cymbal right there in the beginning of the song. So it was nice to hear that done well. And then soundstage, I think it's got a really nice modern wide soundstage, just like you would expect from a KZ in 2021. So while it's a throwback and bassy fun sound, it doesn't have that narrow, confined sound that you found back in late 2018 or previous KZ models. It's very much a bigger, wider sound, and that just adds nice separation and imaging and all those other things that come along with having enough space for instruments and vocals. And when the vocals are forward, they're nice and big as well, and you'll find that in the Kung's This Girl as well. So again, that was just a kind of quick run through, and I apologize for going back and forth between this thin tip version with the silver cable version and the copper version and the Starline tips, but they actually are quite different. And the more people get their hands on it, the more you'll see people talking about it in these two different ways. So I just wanted to make you aware of that and say that I do enjoy it much more as a bassier version than the lean, detailed version. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, and I will see you next time.